Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Measurement Talks. So to kick us off today, there's an interesting news on my LinkedIn profile. Actually, I was browsing last night and I came across a post from Bernardo Lara. For those that don't know, Bernardo Lara is one of the co-authors for Meta, and it looks like a good chunk of the marketing science team was let go in a recent round of layoffs from Meta. And I found that to be both concerning and it raised an eyebrow because, one, I've been following Bernardo's efforts for a long time. I've seen him bring Robin to the market. And then I remember Robin was just super small. It was just a small community. It was kind of like an internal tool. And I heard it through a good friend that worked at Meta. And I was like, wow, this is incredibly fascinating. I remember coming across it in 2020. And it's been the impetus, I think, or the foundation for a lot of measurement for what would be enterprise level, hard to reach measurement solutions in the market. And he was let go. And I found that to be a bit interesting and sort of conflicting based off of Meta's push towards measurement and media mix modeling.
Yeah.
I guess it raises the question is if Meta is seeing in the market a surge of vendors that are now providing these solutions. And so they found it to be more cost effective to just let the market do its thing versus trying to bring it to the market where before it was hard to reach, right? Before, if you wanted a media mix model or some sort of incrementality testing, you'd have to go to Newstar or Measured or some of these other partners that frankly are more geared towards enterprise given the contracts and the fees. So I found it to be interesting. What does this mean on Meta's position? I think they still look at measurement as an important piece, but it is a bit ironic that they wouldn't bolster up the marketing science team, instead it seems like they let a good chunk of them go.
Yeah, I wonder if it's more like organizational as opposed to strategic, where the question, just from our last episode when we were talking about the performance marketing summit, it felt like they were very leaned in to, hey, measurement is super important. Not only is measurement super important, but we are strongly encouraging you to do incrementality and media mix modeling. I mean, I came out of that feeling like, okay, these guys are going to push MMM for the next 12 months in order to prove efficacy of the channel. Yep. And so like in that context, it's like, yes, I mean, I agree with you. It feels like it's in conflict with that push, but I wonder if it's not just more organizational as opposed to strategic. And actually what we end up seeing is like a burgeoning. I think it'll be super interesting to see, do they let it sort of taper out? Or do they instead say like, actually, the reason we let this team go is because the way we're going to invest in it is in this other way. And we see like a whole suite of tools come out of Meta over the next 12 months. And I feel like the only thing that we can say with certainty is like, they're not going to take this middle path of like, hey, we have an option and then there are other options.
Right.
They're like sort of forked where it's either reduce investment or actually like get ready for a big ramp up.
So it's fascinating you say that. And I think you're onto something there. When I was at the summit, I attended one of the happy hours and it was in passing. I had a conversation with someone not related to any of the accounts that I'm on or anything, but it was a person that I met there and that worked at Meta. And I asked him, I was like, hey, what's with the news of the marketing science team being restructured? And I think with the push based off of the response and what you just said here, with the push towards AI and the underscoring and leaning into all of the AI innovation that Meta has been doing behind the scenes, the way it was described to me is that it is a restructure. The team was let go. And typically what would happen is when you were a brand and you wanted to do some sort of conversion lift study or you wanted to do some sort of incrementality test or anything like that, the marketing science team was cross-functional. You would have to go through your rep, and then the rep would go to the marketing science team, and then they may be looped in, or they may just be like at arm's length. And what I gathered is now any of these sort of like meta-analysis and these tests that the team is doing, they're going to happen automatically. And so whereas before you would get, as a brand, you would get a letter or some sort of like invite and say, hey, you're going to participate in this meta-analysis. We're going to use your data.
Wow.
The understanding that I have now is that it's going to happen on the back end, and the sort of the A/B testing, the configuration, the meta-analysis, all of that is going to happen internally without brands knowing. I think, does that scare me as a brand? I'm going to miss some of those ad credits. It's always great because you can get those ad credits, but I'm actually optimistic in that being faster, more efficient. I don't know about disruptive. I don't think it'll be disruptive. I think with Meta's auction and how they're continuing to refine it and how they're continuing to lean into AI, I think it's getting to a point where it can support this. sort of mass testing at scale where they can pull in advertisers and then basically internally promote and roll out certain features here, have a holdout there. And we see that, right? We saw that with the Shops discount. Everybody was suddenly like, why am I seeing this discount all of a sudden? What the heck? I didn't opt into this. So maybe it's this world where it's automatic opt-in. You have to opt out if you get selected. And there may be a lot of studies just happening that we will never, ever know about or see the light of day until the case study comes out months and months later. So I think you're right. I think they saw some success with that. And they're like, okay, we don't need this massive team to support all this and like go herd cats on getting all these advertisers bought into tests. We can do this more lean and more efficiently with a smaller team and just do it on the back end without needing to go and get permission. So you said that and it started triggering some memories where I'm going to be on the lookout for more of these sort of tests.
That's incredible. Man, I'm honestly, if that's how it plays out, I'm like very excited to see how the next 3 months play out, because we're going to start to see so much rich data about things that we like previously didn't understand or didn't appreciate, because we went through this turmoil of measurement where it's like, okay, you can do identity-based measurement very easily. ATT came out, it's like all measurement is broken. And then now you have this, like, it feels like incrementality and experimentation and modeling is starting to like get catalyst boosts along the way. And so that's like, honestly, like very energizing and very exciting. I want to switch topics to something else that we talked about last week, talking about tracking and measurement. iOS 17. What's been the latest over the last week that you've started to see? What's your latest understanding? I feel like people have started to update their thinking a little bit since its first announcement, roughly 10 days ago.
So it is this thing that is ever changing. And it's funny, like I saw pools of people saying UTM parameters are not affected, and it switched to, oh, wait, they are affected. Some people were like, wait, I'm into beta and I'm not seeing that they are affected. And now it's moving back to, wait, but it's in certain conditions where it is affected. So I think my thinking of it is it's still too early to really pinpoint what the true impact is going to be. I believe it just got rolled out, right? Today's the 15th, and I believe it just got rolled out. So average Joe Schmoes can actually start setting up the upgrade or forcing the upgrade. I'll have to check. And that's when we can start to really test it and see what the true impact is going to be. It might be muted at first, right? It might be one of those over-the-air updates where the beta of iOS 17 doesn't necessarily have the tracking limitations, and we won't see the full scope of it until iOS 17.5, for example. I think that's what it was with iOS 14. It wasn't iOS 14 update. It was iOS 14.5.
We all hate the 0.5 now. Those 0.5s get us.
I still think it's too early to tell. If history repeats itself, it's not going to be the first rendition of the update. That'll probably be a soft launch, sort of a slow rollout, feel the effects, get the pushback from everybody in the market. And then it's that sort of adoption curve. And hopefully don't butcher his name here. Alex Bauer over at Branch did a phenomenal job of tracking iOS updates over time, because everybody was like, iOS 14 rolled out, no big deal, no big change, everything's peach, everything's fine. Well, what they were missing is only 10% of users had an update. iOS 14.5 came out, that was a forced update. And you just see this in July of 2022, 2021, you see the mass rollout where the adoption goes from like 30% to 70% in the course of 2 days. And that's when everything just fell down. The house of cards fell down. And we may see something similar here. So it's still too early for me to have a strong opinion on this one way or another. I do believe UTM parameters will be affected. So that's what I'm looking out for. But anything that you've seen on your end?
Yeah, I think like the biggest surprise to me was the early level of denial, saying like, oh, this is not going to affect things, which, by the way, however this turns out is actually totally fine. The thing that I worry about with the denial behavior is like it prevents you from asking the question, how do I prepare my brand? And that's the only thing I personally care about, is like, honestly, it is like you said, it's too early to know. But we talked about this a little bit last time, which is like, hey, let's assume that they are actually going to get rid of tracking, because like the vector at this point is like painfully clear between like ITP in 2017, AT in 2021, and now like link tracking protection. It's like, okay, the vector is just like painfully clear. Let's just assume that we're not going to have it. And like, let's update our thinking on how we target, how we measure, even on things like first party, quote unquote, first party data channels. Because the way that I was always very worried when people said this to me, when they said like, oh yeah, ATT, we're like investing very heavily in first party. And I was like, guys, I'm really not sure you understand what the vector is. I understand the natural reaction to like want to invest in first party channels, but actually ultimately you touch the consumer at a client interface that is not a property that you own, right? And so that could be the Apple messaging app, it could be the Apple Mail app, it could be the Google Mail app, it could be, ultimately it's a client interface that like the brand does not own. And so it's like, it's this weird dichotomy where once you sort of appreciate that actually you are talking to the consumer on somebody else's property, even though it's quote unquote first party data, I think that it helps you reframe and appreciate, okay, actually my job is to think about things from a campaigning perspective and to assume that data asset is not fundamentally owned by me at the point at which I am talking to the consumer, but I can control how I act on my campaigns and I can control how I measure that. And so once you do that, then I think you're way better prepared, right? Because then you can run your campaigns, you can run your email campaigns the way you would run like an out-of-home campaign. And if you have the mental flexibility to know like, hey, here's how I need to measure things, here's how I need to prep for it, it's like all of a sudden not that scary. It's like, okay, fine, like no problem. I know how to do that. I know how to geofence my email campaigns. I know how to geofence because ultimately I actually do have the data asset and it tells me these people are in North Dakota, these people are in Florida. It's like, it's fine. It's fine. And so you can figure it out as long as you actually prepare for it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It's like as a brand, as a marketing leader, or as an operator, you just have to prepare for the worst case scenario. What does iOS 18 look like? Is it SMS? With the amount of text messages I get cold, and I'm like, wait, did I even subscribe to this? Apple's very cognizant about the user experience of their customers. And I think that we could see a world where SMS is the next thing on the target. They're pouring money into this too. Like their ad campaigns are all about privacy. I don't know if you've seen the latest one about the health apps. Right. So it's not just advertising, but it's also just the app ecosystem where Apple is saying, hey, you don't need all these fancy health tracking apps for your cardio and your running and your workouts. Just use the Apple Health app because we're not going to sell your health data. Right. And they're already sort of positioning their own app ecosystem, right? The apps that people subscribe to on a monthly basis where Apple gets a 30% cut on, they're saying, hey, don't do that. Use our app instead, our health app, because we secure your privacy. So it is this sort of crusade against all-in consumer privacy, even if you're in their system. So you might be onto something. iMessage could be the next frontier that they go and tackle in the next update. And so I think as advertisers and as brand operators, we just have to prepare for the absolute worst. What does the world look like where Klaviyo can no longer tell you how much attributed revenue it received? What does the world look like, or what does your measurement strategy look like if Attentive can no longer tell you how much revenue that SMS campaign received or your flows? It's super fascinating, the disruption that could come to those platforms, because those platforms have always had it really good.
Totally.
I've sent post-purchase emails that sometimes like there should be $0 in revenue attributed, but somehow the platform's like, hey, we generated $2,000 in sales. I'm like, how? These people already bought, like they're not buying the product. So and that plagues SaaS, right? And I think that should be a separate topic, is like
totally.
Over attribution. Like everybody talks about attribution on like the ad auctions, but I think it's a healthy discussion to have. I love Klaviyo, but are we taking what Klaviyo is saying at face value? The SaaS attribution world is like just nightmarish in terms of over.
Yeah, it's a wild world out there. And I think this actually brings us to the last thing I wanted to touch on. I know we only have a couple minutes, but when we sell nowadays, one of the number one thing we see is, I got asked by you very early on, but now we see it with like every customer. How does this impact my contribution margin based on what you've seen with your other customers? And the CFO is either in the room or I am actually doing a financial model with the CMO. They're basically virtually in the room. Either they're literally in the room or they're virtually in the room, the head of finance. And so this is like a phenomenon that I've noticed has like surged over the last sort of like month or so. And I'm curious, like what you make of it. So for me, what this means is like the marketer is all of a sudden, I think these tools that used to tell you like, hey, here's how much extra revenue you've generated. I think like those kind of feel good numbers are going to start to become less important.
Yeah.
And like what's going to become more important is this tool giving me data that I can go present to my CFO.
Yeah.
Or because like if my CFO is just seeing a top line number, they're just going to be like, get out. This actually doesn't tell us anything. Like I need to understand like what is the contribution margin of this channel, or at least that's my impression. What do you think of that?
I think it signals two things. During periods of boom, we tend to leverage every tool accessible to us, and our stack, our tech stack, our marketing stack just gets possibly out of hand. So I think this signals a period where now CFOs are looking heavily into the books and understanding like what is it that is driving contribution dollars and what needs to go away. And so we've had just this nice expansion over the last 2 years. And I think what's going to happen is things are going to start getting consolidated. And it's happening with us. I have 4 different creative studio partners. Why? Let me just go find one that can handle all 4, have consistent, predictable expenditure, and go from managing 4 different folks to managing one team. I think that's going to happen with platforms where the CFO is going to start getting more involved and putting pressure on the consolidation of tools and services. I think the next thing it signals is that there's a focus on sustainable growth. The CFO is the best person positioned at the company to roadmap that out and really set the guardrails of what that looks like. And there could be sort of this next generation of CMOs or marketers that need to have some sort of finance background. If they don't, then they're going to be solely dependent on the CFO who, let's be honest, doesn't necessarily understand the ins and outs of marketing. And as a marketer, as a CMO, you need to be able to define your own destiny. If you have someone else telling you what your guardrails are, they're not setting it under the best interest. They may not be setting under the best interest of what is doable, what is achievable, what drives conversions, what drives sales, what works. And so I think the next generation or wave of CMOs that are going to be successful will have some sort of finance background, maybe have operated in some sort of CFO position, and are able to tackle sort of both sides of the brain quite well, where they're able to do strategic planning and marketing creative, as well as understanding the finances and the entire unit economics down to the COGS, down to the specific items sold, and understanding how all that ladders up. And a great example, right now I'm doing an assessment to understand the return rate by channel. Are the customers that I'm getting out of this channel, are they truly driving my bottom line? Or is the return rate higher? And it looks like it's profitable, it looks great. But then when you look and take into account the return rates by channel and the quality of the customer that's acquired, maybe because they didn't have enough education, maybe because of that channel, there's not enough qualification. When you break it down, is it truly profitable, right? And like, that's not a thing. I don't think that's something that CMOs have done traditionally. It's always been something that they've just passed on to the finance team. So totally. I think that's changing.
Yeah. Amazing, man. All right. Well, I know we got to wrap this one up, but this was an amazing discussion. Facebook marketing science team, sorry that the changes are happening, but honestly, we're looking forward to what the changes actually are and how this evolves at Meta. We're going to keep an eye on this one. And to those of you listening, we'll be sure to make sure we break it down.
2 actionable steps for today's session. I think number 1 would be to spend more time with your CFO, spend more time with the finance team. If you are looking for mentors and you don't have a strong financial background, go find financial mentor that you can just bounce ideas and bounce like analysis and planning off the wall with. Maybe hire an analyst, right? Someone that can, support those analysis and those insights and then surface those up to you. I mean, I think number 2 is look at your marketing mix and think about everything that requires some sort of tracking item and imagine a world where that is completely gone. What do? How do you then continue to explain that subscription and that tool or that activation is necessary for bottom line to a CFO? So I think thinking about what that world looks like, because you nailed it. We know the vector, we know the direction that Apple's heading in. It's not going to stop here with iOS 17. So we need to start thinking 2 to 5 years ahead now and really planning like, what does 5 years from now, what does that look like? If Attentive and Klaviyo and all these other tools had 0 attribution, how do we then measure that?
Awesome. All right, guys. Good one.